It is hard to believe that someone could survive being locked in a serial killer's basement for 72 hours, yet alone come out of it to tell the tale. But that's exactly what happened in 1997 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So here's what really happened. Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be looking at the case of Daniel Whitaker and how he managed to escape serial killer Leonard Harley. Let's jump into it. Daniel Whitaker was your typical 22-year-old college student. He liked playing basketball, hanging out with friends, and working his part-time job at a local hardware store. He was known by his co-workers as being a very friendly and helpful young man, always willing to lend a hand to those in need. In fact, one of his co-workers recalls Daniel telling a story about an elderly customer who needed help carrying groceries to her car. He told me that he'll never forget the look on the lady's face when he came out of the store and saw him standing there. She was so grateful, she said. On Friday, October 1997, Daniel finished his shift at the hardware store at around 8:30 p.m. After picking up some takeout food, he started his walk home. He was only a few blocks away and figured he might as well walk off the food instead of taking the bus. What he didn't know was that 48-year-old Leonard Harley was watching him from the shadows. You see, Harley had lived in the neighborhood for most of his life. He was retired and spent his days tending to his garden, working on electronics, and planning. Leonard had been stalking potential victims for months, targeting young men that he saw walking home from work or school. He chose his victims based on their routines, making sure that he knew their patterns before approaching them. He had carefully observed Daniel and decided that he would make a perfect addition to his collection. As Daniel walked toward the corner of Prince and Walnut Streets, he felt his gut twist. Without warning, he turned around just in time to see a man backing out of his driveway. Something about the man's eyes sent shivers down Daniel's spine. Instinctively, he quickened his pace, hoping to put some distance between them. But the man's car was already pulling back onto the road. It was then that Daniel realized he was in danger. He tried to run, but it was too late. The man grabbed him by the arm and dragged him into his basement. Daniel struggled, kicking and screaming for help, but no one came. In fact, he never even heard anyone nearby. When Daniel looked back, he saw the man holding a pair of handcuffs. He tried to explain that he didn't mean any harm, but the words caught in his throat. As the man led him down the basement stairs, he couldn't help but notice the soundproofing material covering the walls. He was terrified, knowing that he had just entered the lair of a madman, but the man wasn't done with him yet. He pushed him roughly onto a chair and began tying his hands together with a rough rope. "Don't fight it," he said calmly. "I won't hurt you, not yet anyway." Daniel could only stare in disbelief as the man explained his twisted plan. He planned to keep Daniel in his basement for 72 hours, subjecting him to isolation and sensory deprivation to break him. Then he would decide whether to kill him or let him go. The man introduced himself as Leonard Harley and said that he had been doing this for years. He had taken several victims down into his basement, but only 3 had survived. "I want to know if you're stronger than they were," he said, his eyes gleaming with a manic energy. And so Daniel found himself imprisoned in a soundproof basement, forced to listen to nothing but the drip of a nearby faucet. Days passed, and he grew weaker with each passing hour. Leonard visited him regularly, bringing him food and water and asking him questions about his life, but his tone was always condescending, and he never offered any kindness. Sometimes he would just stand there and stare at Daniel, waiting for him to break. During those long hours, Daniel began to panic. He tried to scream, but his throat was hoarse from disuse. He tried to bang on the door, but his fists were weak and his nails were torn and bleeding. He was desperate to escape, but it seemed impossible. However, Daniel was not the type to give up. He knew that if he wanted to survive, he had to try something. So he began planning his escape. He studied the basement, looking for any weakness he could exploit. He listened carefully to Leonard's footsteps, trying to anticipate his routine, and he watched the clock on the wall, counting the hours until he could make his move. Then on the third day, his chance came. Leonard had grown bored with him and had left the basement for hours. Daniel seized the moment and began to dig with his fingernails at a loose brick in the wall. It was slow, tedious work, but he was determined to succeed. Finally, after what felt like hours, the brick came loose and Daniel was able to crawl through the hole he had made. He found himself in a narrow passageway that led to a staircase. One by one, he climbed the steps, his heart pounding in his chest. He emerged into a dark room and quickly hid under a table. He could hear Leonard returning, and he knew he had to wait until he had passed before making his escape. When he heard the sound of footsteps fading away, Daniel slipped out from under the table and ran. He didn't know where he was going, but he didn't care. All that mattered was that he was away from that house and free from Leonard's clutch. He ran barefoot through the streets, his clothes torn and his body covered in dirt. As he stumbled along, he could hear the sound of sirens in the distance. People stared at him in shock as he passed, and some even called out to him, asking if he was all right, but Daniel didn't respond. He was too busy trying to outrun the horrors of the past 3 days. Finally, he collapsed on the doorstep of a house and pounded on the door with all his might. A woman opened it and gasped in surprise at the sight of Daniel. But before she could say anything, he burst into tears and whispered, "He kept calling me Seven." The woman's heart went out to him, and she immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers were at the house, and soon afterwards, Leonard was taken into custody. The police searched his house and found several disturbing things, including a hidden basement with chains, ropes, and other restraints. They also found a logbook containing the names and contact information of many women, as well as several photographs of young men. At first, Leonard denied everything, claiming that Daniel had made up the whole story. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was charged with several counts of unlawful detention and related offenses, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Daniel, he received counseling to help him deal with the trauma of his experience. He eventually went on to live a normal life, but he never forgot the lessons he had learned during those terrifying 72 hours. "Fear doesn't last forever," he says, "and sometimes, even in the darkest places, there's a way out." So there you have it, the story of Daniel Whitaker, the young man who survived 72 hours in a serial killer's basement. If you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe for more content. Also, please share your thoughts and opinions below. Thanks for watching.